Now, the next question, rural kinship and caste imprints in urban areas. Again, a very important topic because generally you have these kind of questions, right? So questions which are related to continuity and change are quite frequent. Now, what is continuity and change? See, many times when we are evaluating our society or different kinds of social institutions, right, we use this term. What is the meaning of this? See, our society is changing. The social norms are changing. The social institutions are changing. But they have not changed completely. They tend to remain continuous in some aspect. What do we mean by this is, certain dimensions of our society change, but certain dimensions remain same. So tradition and modernity continue to coexist. That is the meaning of this. So what we are going to do here is, we are going to look at some elements which are traditional, but they continue to exist even in a modern society. So when it comes to caste, we assume that caste is something which is more of a rural phenomenon. The role of caste in urban areas might be minimal. But how does it hold? Does it hold true? Right? Is this argument correct or is this wrong? Similarly, we assume that in rural areas a particular kind of kinship patterns will be there. In urban areas a particular kind of kinship patterns will be there. But maybe in urban areas there is a different kinship pattern, or maybe at least in some pockets there is a different kinship pattern, which is kind of the kinship pattern that we have in rural areas. So that is what we try to understand. Now, when it comes to families, when it comes to kinship, Talcott Parsons, he said that families are becoming nuclear in modern capitalistic urban economies. So basically in urban areas, areas where you have the markets, right? Families are more nuclear. You find more predominance of nuclear households, smaller families. You don't have large families. That's what he predicted. But is it true in the Indian context? We'll evaluate that. Another thing, what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar mentioned about villages, right? So these are the exact words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So B.R. Ambedkar, he says that Indian villages are sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism. So in rural areas, this is what happens. People are ignorant, people might be communal, people might be narrow-minded. This is Dr. Ambedkar's word, not my words. Okay, so don't blame me for all these things. Exact words of Dr. Ambedkar. And that is the reason he's saying, the next sentence is also Dr. Ambedkar, he's saying that Dalits, they should move away from villages, practicing residential segregation to the anonymity of cities. So in villages, in rural areas, there is segregation. So you'll have certain areas where the dominant community, upper class, they will be staying. Usually the Dalit members, those who are treated as untouchables, they will be staying in the periphery. They will not be staying in the center of the villages. They will be staying somewhere outside the village. So he's saying that in rural areas, you're going to face all these things. In rural areas, this is the case. Move out of rural areas. In urban areas, you are anonymous. There is anonymity. People might not really care about who you are, what is your caste, what is your position in the caste hierarchy. So urban areas are better in that respect. So this is what Dr. Ambedkar suggested. So the question is, how far all these things is true at this point? Right? So we will look at some data points, we'll look at some empirical evidence, we'll see whether these points are true or not, whether this thing is true, whether this thing is true. So we refer to multiple studies now. So when it comes, first we'll look at kinships, then we'll look at caste. So when it comes to kinships, multiple studies have been made in the Indian urban context, and we'll look at each of them one by one. The first is by Mr. Breton. Now, Mr. Breton says, sociologist Breton, he says that India's nuclear households have increased, but modestly. It's not that we are having a lot of nuclear households. There are nuclear households, but the increase in nuclear households has been modest. It has not been huge. From the national sample survey, right, again, it is pan-India level survey, they find out that an overwhelming majority, around 80% of elderly widows and widowers, they live with their children. So generally, I mean, you'll find that in most cases, widows, right, those who have lost their spouses, they're living with their children. So again, points to the fact that you are not necessarily having a nuclear household. Right? You're having three generations, at least three generations staying together. So it is an example of an extended family. Rajni Palriwala says, again, looks at the census data and says, between 2001 and 2021, the joint families have increased by 29% in urban areas and 2% in rural areas. So joint families have actually increased between two census. This is what Rajni Palriwala is saying. Now, it is worthwhile to understand why all these things are happening, or why do we have so many of these joint households, right? Why we haven't seen nuclearization as much as we would expect. So some explanations are there. One study by Janaki Abraham, it suggests that if you are having joint families, it becomes convenient from the point of doing joint business. Look at many of the urban areas in India. Look at some of the business organizations in India. They're all family businesses. Some of the communities are engaged in these kind of business. For example, the Marwari communities, right? So they will be engaged in businesses, family businesses, and most of them will be staying in urban areas, and they will be having joint families. Also, there is an assumption that if you are in a joint family, individualism will not be respected, privacy will not be respected, but that might not always be the case. In many of the joint families, individuality is respected to some extent. So Janaki Abraham says you have so many business families in India. These are all examples that joint families continue to exist in urban India, and they are the ones who are leading different businesses. Tulsi Patel says that it is very difficult to define a nuclear family in India. It becomes very tricky. Nuclear families, this entire concept that is there, it is very fluid. In case of India, you'll have fluid off and on joint households. Now, what is the meaning of this? See, there might be husband, wife, and children, but sometimes when the parents are becoming old, they will come and stay with their children, right? So you now have three generations staying together. It might happen that husband and wife are there and they have one child and the wife is not expecting. At this point of time, again, maybe the grandparents will come and they will stay. The parents will come and they will come and stay together with them to take care of the pregnant female. Sometimes the grandparents will come and stay to take care of the grandchildren. And again, when the grandchildren become older, maybe the grandparents will move. So with time and with requirements, with changing requirements, again, this entire joint household keeps on changing to a nuclear household. Sometimes it will become joint household. So this entire concept is very fluid. Right? At some point of time, it will be in a particular shape. At some point of time, the shape will be completely different. And in recent times, another thing is happening. We are having these gated communities, especially in the metropolitan cities, Gurgaon, Noida, Delhi. You have all these Bangalore, right? You have all these gated communities. In these gated communities, a new kind of bond is being developed. Within people inside the gated communities, you will now have some form of extended kinship ties. They feel that they are part of the same community. Right? So those kind of new forms of kinships are also developing. So there are some more observations. In case of India, the nuclear families, urban nuclear families, they are evolving over a period of time. And they are evolving as a result of a bunch of factors. Migration, sometimes the elderly will need different kind of support. Sometimes you need support for the children. In fact, around you also will find there will be couples who are both working and they have very young children. Right? So maybe they have a child who is 2-year-old, 3-year-old. So they might find it very difficult to take care of the child. So in that case, they will ask their own parents, right, to come and stay with them. So grandparents, grandchildren can come together and stay. So requirements of the children require the support that the child requires, it is provided by the grandchildren. In some cases, the grandparents might require some support. So in that case, they can stay together. Also, the cost of living is increasing, and as a result of which, it might be difficult to have separate households. So instead of maintaining separate households, why not stay together? Cost of living will be shared together. And women are now participating in the labor force. As women participate in the labor force, again, who's going to take care of the children and all these things? So maybe the grandparents come together. So our urban nuclear families are dependent on all these things. Another interesting finding is, among the poorest, you will find them living in nuclear families as well. Some of the poorest families, they are nuclear households. They are not necessarily joint households. Now, what explains the extreme poor staying in nuclear households? First is, maybe they don't have any inherited property, inherited house or inherited land where they can stay together. Secondly, many of them might buy smaller houses, right? Or maybe they will build a smaller house, or they will rent out a smaller house. And again, they don't have too many incentives to live together because maybe they don't have enough income to support everyone. So again, among some of the poorest, there is proliferation of nuclear families. So these are some interesting findings when it comes to families, kinship networks in the urban context. Right? Some of these things you can actually refer in your answers, right? Because sometimes they will ask you about what are some of the recent trends. So this is about kinship patterns. Now, what about caste networks? Right? What are some of the caste imprints in urban India? As per the census 2011 data, if you look at the proportion of Dalits living in urban areas, and if you look at the proportion of Dalits who are living in slums, you'll find that the proportion of Dalits living in slums is more than the proportion of Dalits in the total population. Proportion of Dalits living in slums is more than their proportion in the total urban population. So a lot of Dalit members are actually staying in slums. And if you look at the composition of slum dwellers, here you will find again, large section of them are the Dalit members. So it basically gives you an idea that those who are from the scheduled caste community, they are financially, economically not as well off, and they are staying in some of these places. Slums are those places where you do not have very good amenities, right? You don't have all these basic amenities are not there. Now, there was one research by Pranav Sidwani. It finds out that those places, those wards, which have high scheduled caste, scheduled tribe population, they also lack various amenities. Water, toilet facilities, all these things will not be there. Now, you might have a question. How is it possible, right? You have different policy schemes for providing water, for providing sanitation facilities, for providing water facilities. How come some people, some communities, some areas, they're lacking this? See, two things here. One is the way people are settled, right? It is kind of segregated. In rural areas, there was segregation, right? Members from scheduled caste community will be staying outside in the periphery. Now also, this is more or less there is segregation. There will be some clusters where they will be, where the proportion of scheduled caste members will be more. On top of that, when it comes to distribution of all these amenities, right, where a particular facility will be constructed, where a community toilet will be constructed, where drinking water facilities will be there, all these things are decided at the local level. And again, whoever are more influential, whoever has social capital, whoever has political capital, they have a higher say. As a result of which, again, the resources are not distributed equally. And again, this is as per data, right? It's not something someone's opinion piece, right? So that, okay, I feel like that. No, that's not the case. On the basis of data, it finds out that those wards which have high concentration of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe population, they do not have access to all these amenities. And then ward level data from 6 large cities, I'll show you some of these things on a map. You'll find segregated residential pattern. So basically, those who are belonging from marginalized communities, they are clustered in certain areas. Ideally, what we would expect, communities are equally distributed, right? So it's not that in one place you will have a higher proportion of a particular community, in another place it will be lower proportion. Ideally, it should be mixed. Right? If you are saying that there is no discrimination, if you are saying that everyone is equal. So if you look at the population, ideally what should happen is in some ward, okay, you have scheduled caste population, scheduled population, forward caste, etc. In other ward also it will be the case, but that's not the case. Some areas you have clustering of people from certain communities. So why is this the case, right? It's just like how you have in rural areas where again communities are staying. It's not that the entire society is staying together. So that is what is happening. I'll show you in a map. Apart from that, you have instances of caste violence, which is typical of rural areas. In urban areas also it is there. Maybe the numbers are not as high, but it continues to exist. Even in some of the metropolitan cities, you have caste violence, and it's not negligible. So places like Bangalore also have caste violence, and some of these cities, for example, Patna, Lucknow, they top when it comes to caste violence. And again, keep in mind, these numbers are less, but usually these kind of cases are not reported. So there will be underreporting of cases. So the actual number of these incidents will be even way more. This particular sentence is very important. See, typically we would assume that in urban areas, there should be a different kind of social values. We will assume that there will be different kind of social relations. In rural areas, you have a particular kind of social construct, right? You have a particular kind of social relation. You have a particular kind of social values in rural areas. And we'll assume that in urban areas, these things will be different. Because the nature of urban society, the nature of urban economy is different. But what we are experiencing is, in urban areas also, some of the features from the rural areas have been transferred. And ideally, the rural hinterland should be completely different. Urban areas should have some autonomous social political dynamic. That has not been the case. So whatever you experience in rural area, to a large extent, all these things have been carried to the urban areas as well. There was one study by Human Rights Watch and Center for Human Rights and Global Justice. They find that Dalits are overrepresented among those who are detained and tortured, and they don't have social and political capital. So they looked at those who are detained, and they find out that Dalit members, their proportion is quite high, and they do not have enough social political capital. What are the different kinds of crimes which are committed against members of the scheduled caste community? It can be criminal intimidation, rape, all these things are different kind of crimes. And in the year 2020, some 50,000 crimes against scheduled castes were there, but there was conviction only in 216 cases. Right? So look at it, right? 216 for 50,000 cases. Again, points to the fact that violence continues against them, and they're not getting justice. And these are all based on National Crime Records Bureau data. Right? They're not. It's not just some survey. This is the government data. So the point here is, some of the issues that Dalits face in rural areas that continues to be there in urban areas as well. So what Dr. Ambedkar was talking about, that Dalits should move out of rural areas, they should find some place in urban areas, they will have a better lifestyle in urban areas, residential segregation will not be there in urban areas, that might not hold true. There is residential segregation, and on top of that, different amenities are also not equally accessible to members from the Dalit community or scheduled tribe community. So this is, these are some maps from some cities. You can just Google it. I've taken it from Mint website, and so there is one article, the geography of caste in urban India. You can just Google it. You will get multiple maps which gives you an idea, right? How in urban areas also you have caste-based segregation. So here what you find is, this is from Chennai. I'll show you some other cities as well. So there is a study of 6 cities in this particular study. So darker green implies greater proportion of people from the scheduled caste community, scheduled tribe community. So you can find that there are some places which are dark green in color. There are some places which are light green in color. Ideally, there should be uniformity, right? Similar kind of color should be there, which is not the case. Some areas you will have greater concentration of scheduled tribe population, and again here it is mostly along the railway lines. Now this is from Delhi. Again, you'll find that there are some places which are dark green in color. Concentration of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe population. Here, this is from Bangalore. Here also you'll find greater concentration in some places. It's not uniform throughout. It's not that everywhere the proportion of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe remains uniform. So you can go through this article even more, and the article basically talks about the factors which decides where you have greater concentration of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe population as well. Right. So the point here is segregation occurs even in cities. Right. In rural areas it was there, it occurs even in urban areas, and different kinds of amenities are distributed based on some of these things. So those places which are dominated or which have high concentration of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, they don't have the right kind of amenities. So this is about the rural kinship and caste imprints in urban areas. Very important because these kind of questions are generally asked in mains examination. So we would expect something. The expectation is in urban areas you will not have, you'll have a different kind of kinship patterns, you'll have a different kind of social structure, but that might not always be the case if you look at the empirical evidence, and this is what they try to test. So let's look at a question. It is argued that caste and kinship are losing hold in urban areas. However, in the light of recent data analysis, analyze the imprints of caste and kinship in urban India. Right. So all the points that we discussed. First, you can talk about how caste and kinship should ideally lose their hold in urban India. What Parson says, what Dr. Ambedkar says, all those theories you can talk about. Then you can talk about how you have caste imprints in urban India, how you have kinship imprints in urban India, and then you can conclude. Right. So you can agree with what the statement is saying. Though we are moving towards change, but still some elements continue to exist. We are moving towards modernity, but tradition still continues to exist. We still have some traditional elements. Now, the next topic is on women and political participation. So again, interesting, important, because usually these kind of things are like the favorite topics, and this can also be asked in essay as well. General studies also you can get questions related to this. So when it comes to politics, what is its linkage with women? How have women participated in politics? How women have participated in different political institutions, and how women have actively participated in society. So all these things we are going to analyze one by one. Right. So this is what we're going to do for the next 15 minutes or so. The last topic is kind of a static topic, cultural life. Will not take much time. I want to devote some time in this because there are a bunch of things which are interesting. Also, we will try to understand why women's participation in politics is important. Right? We need to know that, right? Why women should be there in politics. How does it impact the society overall? How does it impact the economy overall? So how do we structure this? First, we will see what was the situation of women when it comes to politics in pre-independent India. Then after independence, what was the situation of women in politics? Then we will also look at some recent studies. Right? So how has women's participation in politics become better or worse? How it has changed the society? So this is how the structure is going to look like. So before independence, during the British period, what was happening? Were women able to participate in politics? Did women have representation in politics? Now, when Britishers were in India, women did not have sufficient representation. In fact, they didn't have representation in politics. Women did not have voting rights, by the way. In fact, men also, all men were also not having voting rights. So at this point of time, it was restricted. Not everyone can participate in the electoral process, and women had massive restrictions. In fact, in 1970, there was a demand by women that we should have voting rights. There was one committee, the Montego-Chelmsford Reforms Committee. So they were trying to come up with a new constitution back then. In 1919, this thing comes up, right? So in 1970, to this committee, women demanded that we should have voting rights. But this committee rejected it. It rejected women's voting rights, and it also rejected universal adult franchise. Universal adult franchise means anyone who is an adult should be given the right to vote. So both these demands were rejected. But gradually what is happening? Some women organizations are coming up at this point of time. All India Women's Conference, Women India Association, they're all championing for women's rights. And they're all demanding that women should have voting rights. And gradually, women are given some voting rights in some provinces at different points of time. So gradually women are having voting rights, and some women are also contesting elections. So one of the first female who's contesting elections is Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay in 1920s. But she's losing. She's not winning. And many other candidates were there, they're also gradually losing. And at this point of time, though some women are given the right to vote, but it is extremely restricted. It's not that any woman can vote. It was decided on the basis of age. Also, women should have some minimum amount of property in their name. Then only they can vote. So as a result of which, only 1% of women could vote as compared to 11% men. Again, keep in mind, all men were also not allowed to vote. Different kinds of restrictions were there. Gradually things are changing. Gradually things are changing, and we are now gradually having some women leaders. In 1927, M. Muthulakshmi Reddy, she is becoming the first woman to be nominated to the Legislative Council in colonial India. So some of these names can be important from Film's perspective. Maybe you can keep a note of this. Apart from that, even if women are not able to participate in active numbers in politics, some of them are participating in politics in different ways. They might not be holding, or they might not be entering into different institutions, but they are continuing their struggle. Some of them might be politically conscious, so they're participating in the freedom struggle. Some of them want to bring about reforms to the society, so they are becoming prominent over there. For example, Savitribai Phule, right? She is playing a very important role in social reforms. She is questioning the caste hierarchy. She is questioning all the different kinds of gender injustices that are there. Then you have some women leaders who are playing a very prominent role in the moderate phase. Swarna Kumari Devi, Kadambini Ganguly, during the moderate phase of the freedom struggle. Then during the extremist phase, some women are playing a very significant role. Usha Mehta, she was running underground radios, right? So in extremist phase. And then there were some women who played a very significant role in the revolutionary phase. Veena Das, Bikaji Kama, Kalpana Dutt. So the point that I want to make here is, these women, they were not part of any legislative councils, assemblies, etc. But they are playing a significant role in politics. Freedom struggle. Some of them are playing a very important role in the society. So we are getting different types of women leaders. Maybe they are not holding on to the institution, but they are playing a very significant role. Gradually, women's representation is also increasing. How? So there was this Ramsay MacDonald Communal Award. There was a proposal that there will be 2.5% seats for women. And again, this was that separate electorate. Women will be voting for women. So it was considered to be something which is divisive. But later on, the Government of India Act, it is coming up with, it is increasing, it is giving voting rights to women. And now 2.5% of women could vote. And in the elections of 1937, 10 women were elected from general constituencies, 41 were elected from reserve constituencies, 5 were nominated to the provincial legislative councils. So gradually you are seeing more participation of women in these in an institutional manner. So this is a story in pre-independent India. Post-independent India, what has happened? So now we will look at different parameters, different categories. I'll come to that slide. Now look at this graph. These are all different general elections, right? Elections to the Lok Sabha. This is basically telling you what was the participation of women, what is the participation of men in these elections. Right? How many women, what is the percentage of women who exercise their right to vote? How many men exercise their right to vote? What was the voter turnout? Now you can observe here, in the third elections, right, 1962, we don't have data for the first two, you can find out that 63.3% of the men, they voted. and 46.6% of the women voted. So there's a gap of 16.7% in the third Lok Sabha elections, right? So more men are going out and voting for their preferred political candidate. Women are not voting as much. But if you look at the trends over a period of time, by the 2014 elections, this gap had reduced drastically. It was just 1.5%. So 67% of the men were voting and 65.6% of the women were voting. The gap was minimal. And the interesting point is, in the 2019 general elections, the women voter participation was more than the men's voter participation. 67.18% women and 67.01% was male voter participation. Right? So over a period of time, not only has the gap reduced, women's exercising the vote, exercising the electoral choices has increased. Right? So this is something which is interesting. Right? Women are willing to participate in one way or other. Now the next thing, the same thing, it has been illustrated in a graphical manner, how the gap in voter turnout has changed over a period of time. And again, different states, how things look like. What about winning elections, right? What about participating in elections? What about winning elections? Now again, interesting data point. In the first Lok Sabha, 4.4% of the members of Lok Sabha, right, members of parliament in Lok Sabha were women. You had 489 seats and 22 were women. By 2014, right, you had 61 members. The percentage had become 11.2%. In the recent Lok Sabha, 14% of the total strength is women. Now whether we should be happy about it or we should be sad about it. Now the positive point here is the representation of women in Lok Sabha has gone up, right, from 4.4% to 14%. But what is the sad part? The representation is still very minimal, right? It is just 14%. If you compare India with countries in our neighborhood, there you will find more political participation of women, more women in their legislative assemblies. Right? So this is, though it has increased, it should have increased even further. Right? So at present, women are not adequately represented in our legislative assemblies. What can be the consequence of this? If you don't have enough women policymakers, the concerns of women might get neglected. The policies that are being made, they might actually be looking at the interest of male members more as compared to the interest of the female members. So this is again not very good news, and India is among those countries which has very less participation of women, right? A matter of concern. What about women in local government? Now here there is an interesting thing. If you look at the parliament, if you look at the state legislative assemblies, you do not have enough women participation. But when it comes to local government, at the Panchayati Raj level, at the municipality level, you have more women participation. And what is one of the reasons for it? See, 1993, right? We drafted something, we changed our constitution. The constitution was amended for the 73rd time, and there was a law passed that you will have, all the states in India, all places will have Panchayati Raj institutions or urban local bodies, right? You'll have municipalities, and they should have representation of women. At least 1/3 of the seats should be reserved for women. And then it's up to the state to decide what is the total amount of reservation. What some states have done, they have increased this number. For example, in Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, 50% of the seats are reserved for women. In Sikkim, 40% of the seats are reserved for women. So as a result of it, what has happened? The participation of women or the presence of women in these Panchayati Raj institutions, urban local bodies is way better than their participation in at the national level and at the state level. So women are occupying around 54.3% of the position in the panchayats. Right? So this is kind of a contrast. At the national level, at the state level, you don't have women representation, but at the local level, you're having a decent amount of representation. So this is how things look like. But this does not mean that there is no criticism of it. Bunch of things here. Women's participation has lagged, and mostly it is because of different kinds of social constraints. Right? So these are different kinds of social constraints which prevent women from participating in politics. Many times women are not allowed to step out of the house. In many cases, they don't have enough education. They're not literate. Many times they're expected to carry out different kinds of household chores, as a result of which they cannot perform at the office. So these are major criticisms why women's participation has lacked in politics. And though women are right now in all these local constituencies, they are in this local level of government, there's again another criticism here. Many times you have female who are part of Panchayati Raj institutions or urban local bodies, but they are just proxies. They're surrogate representatives for their husbands or for their fathers or for their father-in-laws. Because of the reservation system that is there for women representatives, what has happened? Many male candidates cannot contest an election in that constituency. So what they will do? They will ask their female relative to stand for elections for them. And in fact, what will happen? This entire election campaign will not even have this female representative's face. It will be having the face of the male member. So that is also happening. Many of the decisions that have been taken, it might be the decision of the husband or the father or the father-in-law. So these are some of the issues which still remain. But again, keep in mind, as compared to what situation was in the past, now the situation is better. Maybe over a period of time, it will be even better. It's not that everywhere you will have these kind of proxies. Some places it is the case, some places it might not. Now the question is, as political leaders, in fact, the last 3-4 slides, we are going to focus on this. How women as active citizens play a role, how women as political leaders play a role. So if you are having more women leaders, is there any benefit for the society? So we saw that we don't have enough women in parliament. In fact, we don't have enough women in legislative assemblies of the state as well. There also the situation is same. We don't have more than 20% of the seats for women in any of the legislative assemblies. So we need to have, so there is one argument that we need to have more women leaders. But some people will say, why do we need to have more women leaders? Aren't things good? Aren't things fine enough? So we have some evidence to prove that if you are having more women leaders, things might be better. So let's look at some of these recent studies. First one, there was a study by Chattopadhyay and Esther Duflo. You might remember Esther Duflo. She's one of those Nobel laureates, right? Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee. They got economics Nobel Prize. So they did a study in West Bengal and Rajasthan, and they found out that if there is reservation of a village council seat, it has a major bearing on the provision of public services. So basically, if there is a reservation for women, right, at this level, the women leaders, they invest more in public services which are important for women or which women need. For example, drinking water facility. So if you have reservation for women, access to these facilities, those facilities which women value increases. Provisioning of these facilities increases. So both in West Bengal and Rajasthan, they find this out. There was another study in Maharashtra. They find out that availability of basic public services is better in female-headed villages when the female head has been in the job for 3 to 5 years. So if a female is heading that village and she has served the village for more than 3 years or so, in that case, different kinds of basic services are available. If a male is heading the village, there is no guarantee for this. There was another study by the International Growth Center. They find out that women legislators raise economic performance in their constituencies by 1.8%. And they also find that women leaders tend to be less corrupt, they're more efficient, and they're more motivated as compared to their male counterparts. Another study by Iron Money, they find out that there's an increase of 26% in documented crimes against women after increased political participation. What does this mean? After 1993, 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. So after that, women's participation in politics is increasing. And they are observing that as women's political participation increases, documented crimes increase. So should we have more women in politics if the crimes are increasing? This is a question. Just notice the word. Notice the way it has been framed. So Iron Money, they are saying that documented crimes are increasing, not necessarily crimes are increasing. What it implies is, as you have more women in politics, you have more reporting of crimes. Right? So higher reporting of crimes against women takes place because again you have women leaders. Maybe in the past, women were facing crimes but they were not reporting. But as you have more women leaders, they are now less apprehensive and they're going and reporting these cases. So if you have more women leaders, these can be some of the advantages. There is better economic performance, they are less corrupt, more motivated, different kind of crimes are reported, provisioning of different services, it becomes, it improves, and also those services that women value, that also increases. Now what about women as active citizens? Now, why are we talking about women as active citizens, right? We haven't been talking about women as political leaders. See, what is politics? Politics is not something which happens once in 5 years. Right? Once in 5 years, what you have the elections. But politics is not just elections. Once in 5 years, you elect your candidates who will now be forming the governments, who will now be representing you in the legislative assemblies and the parliament. But politics is also those things which happens every day. Right? The government might come up with a policy, but then whether this policy is good or not, you have to question that from time to time. So politics is also about being someone who is active, someone who is actively participating in the public life. So evaluating the role of women as active citizens is also important. So here again, there are some studies. There was a study in Uttar Pradesh, Iron Money. They're finding out that the biggest gender gap are in non-electoral participation, not in electoral participation. Then we assume that when it comes to elections, women are not participating, men are participating. That's not the case. The biggest gap is in non-electoral participation. For example, there might be just meeting of the members of the village. Here you will find that men are attending, women are not attending. And here the percentage of men attending and women not attending, that difference is huge. Way more than maybe the voter turnout or something else, or representation in the legislative assemblies or parliament. And Iron Money, they try to find out what is the reason why there is this huge gap. And this reason can be multiple things. Maybe women do not have as much knowledge about politics. Maybe they don't have as much knowledge about electoral rules. Maybe they feel that they don't have leadership capacities. Right? So they're evaluating themselves, they think that they don't have the capacity. Maybe in many cases they need the permission from the elder members or from the male members of the household, which they're not getting. As a result of which, they're not able to participate in all these non-electoral things. Another experiment was carried out in Madhya Pradesh. Here they find out that women who are participating in self-group, they were twice as likely to attend village assembly meetings, or they can make a claim on local leaders. Right? So those women who are participating in self-help groups, they are the ones who are most likely economically empowered, socially empowered, and politically empowered. So as a result of which, they are the ones who are participating in elections, they are the ones who are making different kind of demands from the local leaders. So when we were discussing about self-help groups in general studies, we have covered this. How self-help groups leads to social, political, economic empowerment of women. This is what is being reflected here. This is what the study is pointing out. Another study by Chattopadhyay and the flow, they find out that women are more likely to participate in the policy making process if the leader of their village council is a woman. So if you have a women leader, right, more women will be actively participating. So again, there's again an incentive for why we should have more women leaders, right? Women overall participate in the policy making process, which again improves the entire scenario. So these are all different kinds of researches from recent times related to the significance of women leaders, right? Why we should have more women leaders, why we should have more women actively participating in politics, and also what are some of the reasons which are hindering women's participation in politics, which are hindering women participation in being an active citizen, and what can be done to address it. So women and politics, these are all the different areas, right? How women did not have enough space in politics when you had the British rule, how the presence of women in politics is gradually increasing. But despite that, we do not have enough representation of women in parliament or in the state legislative assemblies. One place where you have good amount of participation of women is in the local bodies, right? Panchayat institutions and the urban local bodies. Here also there are different kinds of challenges, different kinds of restrictions. Then if you have more women leaders, if you have more women as active citizens, what can be the advantage? So this covers the entire spectrum. Now let's look at a question. Discuss the trend of women's representation in politics in pre and post-independence. Explain the need of women's reservation bill for reservation of women in the legislature of state and center. So two parts here, right? First part is trend of women's representation. We already know about it. Now for the second part, I want you to do some homework. Right? This is something that you have to study. So some time back, a women's reservation bill was introduced. And again, this bill lapsed, right? So this bill was introduced, and the idea of this bill was 1/3 of the seats in the legislature will be reserved for women candidates. And this bill was introduced, but this bill was never passed. Right? It lapsed. Now the idea here was, if more women seats will be reserved, right, there will be more representation of women in the parliament, and maybe women-related issues will be taken up as women leaders are more. There are different studies which point out that women leaders might benefit more women. As a result of it, this can be beneficial. So you have to study this bill. This bill has lapsed, by the way, right? But you have to study how this could have been effective, or maybe this could not have been effective. One place where you can find this bill is in the PRS website. So in the PRS website, they have analyzed this bill. They have talked about benefits of women reservation. They have also talked about some of the issues with women reservation. One of the issues can be if you are reserving seats for women. So what will happen is the way you are designing the reservation system, it might be different. At present, you have reservation for scheduled caste, scheduled right. So how do you reserve seats for scheduled caste, scheduled right members? Wherever their concentration in the population, wherever the proportion in the population is high, you reserve the seats. But for women, how will you reserve it? Right? If the proportion of women in the constituency is high, should we reserve it? Not necessarily, right? If the proportion of women in the constituency is high, it shows that the sex ratio is good. We might not need reservation. So you have to think about some other methods. One of the methods can be have reservation in a cyclical basis. 1/3 of the constituency is reserved for women next term, another 1/3 next term, another 1/3. Now if you are doing this, again, it might create some other problems. Let's say in the next term, this constituency is going to be reserved for a female leader. What will happen to the present candidate, right? Present representative, present member of parliament? He will not have any incentive to work further because he knows he can't stand in elections if he's a male candidate. So those kind of negative disincentives can be there, which can again prevent the working of the present legislator. So all these issues are there. Also, when you are having reservation, if women representatives are over there, again, similar kind of problems that we see at the local levels, right? You are having proxy candidates and other things. Those kind of things also we might have. So you have to analyze all these things, read from PRS, analyze this, and come up with your answer. Right? So first part is this. The second part, I want you to do some homework. Now the last part, will not take too much time on this. We have talked about it multiple times. This concept of cultural lag. Now what is cultural lag? So for that we need to understand something about culture. When we use the term culture, how do we use it? We say that, right? This is Hindu culture, this is Muslim culture, this is Tamil culture, this is Sanskrit culture. And these kind of terms we use. So what is the meaning of this? Sometimes we use these kind of terms, that the culture of this place is so good. Their culture is so good. Our culture is so better. Now what do you mean by this? So let's try to understand some of these things, and let's try to understand the concept of cultural lag. See, cultures, in a very simplistic way, if you have to understand, it refers to the custom civilization of a particular time or people. Harappan culture was like this. Indo-Islamic culture is like this. Right? So custom civilization of people or of a particular time. Another way to think of it, it can refer to intellectual or artistic achievement or expression. Oh, that culture is so good, right? Maybe it is referring to the music of certain people. Maybe it is referring to the architecture of certain people, or maybe it is referring to the paintings that a particular group of people did. So it can refer to intellectual or artistic achievement. Another way to think of it, or there are two ways to think of it. Culture can refer to, in a very general sense, some total of those characteristics which are unique to mankind, which have no parallel in the animal kingdom. So we say that, right? And I mean, culture is something which is unique to human beings. Animals don't have a culture. right? So some total of those characteristics which are unique to mankind, and there's nothing like that in the animal kingdom. So in a general sense, this is the meaning. In a specific sense, it refers to the totality of life, ways, behavior, patterns of a community or a group. If I'm saying that the Hindu culture is like that, it refers to the Hindu way of life. What kind of marriage practices they have, what kind of religious practices Hindus have. If Hindus have a particular kind of culture, again, within Hindus, you will have different communities, they will have their own unique culture. So it refers to the totality of their life. So these are all different interpretations of culture. Now, some features of culture. Culture is shared. It is something which is social. It is not a personal or an individual phenomenon. So a group of people will have a culture. An individual will not have a culture. It is something which exists among a collectivity of people, right? So it is something which is a social phenomenon. Tamilian culture, Telugu culture, Assamese culture. So basically, those who are speaking Assamese, what kind of culture they have, or the culture of Vidarbha region. People who are in the Vidarbha region, what is their culture? It's not something which is individual or personal. It is shared. Second characteristic: culture is something which is learned, which is acquired. It is not inherited. Genetic features are inherited. The kind of hair that you have, the kind of skin you have, skin color, is inherited from one generation to another. You have inherited from your parents, who have inherited from your grandparents. But culture is not something that is genetic, right? When you are born with a blank slate. But over a period of time, you learn the culture. You learn the culture from your parents, maybe, from your relatives, from your kins. So culture is something which is learned, which is acquired, which is not inherited. Similarly, culture is transmitted from one generation to another. It moves from one generation to another. You have a specific culture. Tomorrow you will have kids. You will pass on your culture to your kids. Then after some time, your kids will grow up. They will have kids. They will pass on the culture. So from one generation to another generation, culture is passed. How it is passed? Through languages, through different kind of gestures, symbols, etc. So culture is social. It is not individual. It is held by a group. It is held by a community. It is something which is not inherited, right? It is learned. It is acquired. It is not in your genes. It is not in your DNA. Right? You have learned the culture from your parents, from your grandparents, from your kins. Culture is something which is passed from one generation to another. Now, culture again has some components. There are some cognitive components. For example, all those components which help you to learn to process from what you hear, what you see, and you give meaning to that. That is the cognitive component. For example, if you are seeing a red light, you try to interpret that. How do you interpret that? Because you have acquired some form of cognitive skills. From the red light, you can interpret that, okay, this is a sign of danger, maybe, or this is a sign for you to stop. So this is the cognitive part of culture. You have learned all these things. From your culture, you have got to know that, okay, if there's red sign, this implies this maybe. Or let's say the phone is ringing, right? You get to know, okay, what is the meaning of that? Again, all these things are shared. Then there is this normative component of culture. It refers to the rules of conduct, how you should behave. For example, if there is someone's diary lying near you, the normative component of culture will tell you that the diary is something which is personal, you should not open it, you should not read it. You should respect someone's private space. If let's say someone is going through difficult times, let's say someone faced some emergency or there was a death in someone's family, the normative component of culture will tell you that you should try to empathize with that person, right? You should try to mourn with that person, you should try to understand the feelings of that person. So the normative component of culture will tell you that. How will you behave, how will you conduct yourself? Then there is the material component of culture, right? Any activity that is made possible by means of a material, that is the material component of culture. And using different materials, you will do different kind of things. Using flour, you'll be creating different kind of designs on the floor. That's the material component of culture. So if you have to divide culture, there is one component which is the material component. Then there are some other components which are the non-material components, right? So these are the non-material components, cognitive components and the non-cognitive component. Now, what is cultural lag? Cultural lag refers to the scenario where the material component of culture and the non-material component of culture, they are moving at different pace. The material component of culture has changed fast. Non-material component of culture is not changing as fast. So there is now a difference. So now there is a lag. That lag is called cultural lag. I'll give you some example. This concept has been given by William Ogburn. What he's saying is, when the non-material dimensions are unable to match the advances of technology, they're not able to match the advances in material culture. So non-material culture refers to the cognitive components, the normative components. It refers to values, beliefs, norms, and many times they will lag behind the material components, technology and other things. So if there is this lag, that is called cultural lag. We'll see two examples which will help us understand this. See, when it comes to population stabilization, different kind of methods are used. Right? One of the methods is, again, contraceptives. And in case of India, again, you have had different kinds of population policies, and we have been trying to promote family planning. So technology is there to control reproduction, right? Contraceptives can be used to control reproduction. So this is the material component of culture. You have all these material components of culture, which technological components are there. But along with that, you also need to change your values, beliefs. What are those value beliefs? You should not be influenced by religion, right? Women should be treated as equal. But all these values and beliefs don't change. People should be more rational. Many of the religions, they will say that, okay, children are gift of God, go for more number of children. Similarly, women, most likely they will not be participating in the labor force. They will not be participating in the labor force. They will be staying in the households. So when it comes to family planning, it is difficult to achieve the targets of family planning because you have advanced form of technology, but there are people who have different kinds of beliefs, different kinds of faith, different kinds of their socially conditioned, which prevents them from using these kind of material components of culture, using different kinds of technology. Another example is related to stem cell, right? So you have advancements in the field of stem cell, and again, stem cell research can be a solution to different kinds of diseases. But at the same time, the way stem cells are extracted, there are different kinds of ethical concerns. So technology has advanced, but there will be different kinds of rules, regulations, ethical concerns related to stem cell research. So again, there is a lag here. Your belief system continues to be the one which existed before, but technology is at a higher level. So there is a conflict between medical advancement and the law, ethical, and the religious beliefs. So this is also an example of cultural lag. So this is the concept of cultural lag. Material component of culture and the non-material component of culture, they are not able to keep up pace with one another. Some people have criticized this as well. For example, there is a criticism that the assumption that you are making that technology is something which will change at a very fast pace while the culture is not changing at a very fast pace might be incorrect. So some people will question that. Another criticism is sometimes culture, society, it plays a very significant role when it comes to change of technology. Rather the other way around, right? In culture, like technology has changed at a very fast pace, culture has not been able to keep up with that. But some commentators will say that it is the other way around. Technology, or for technological progress, society and culture plays a very significant role. In case of India, for example, after India became independent, 1950s, right? We came up with a planning process, and planning process decided what kind of technology they should have, what kind of economic development they should have. Similarly, in case of Europe, you had Renaissance first, right? So different kinds of ideas came up. After that, you are having industrialization and modernization. So maybe it is the other way around. So society, culture, they are progressing first, and it is leading to development of technology. So these are some questions which are asked, some debates that are already there, and some say that maybe there is no such thing as cultural lag, but maybe there is something called as technological lag. Technology is actually not able to be as efficient with the society. So McLever talks about that. So this is about cultural lag and some of the limitations. Again, it's a very static concept. It can be asked in a 10-marker kind of question. One question related to it: explain the relevance of the idea of cultural lag in understanding social change. You can give different examples that we talked about, and you can mention how culture is composed of multiple components. One component changes, the other component doesn't change. How it leads to different kind of conflicts. So this is about all the topics that we were supposed to discuss and we discussed. So we started with planning. Then we talked about the new education policy. What are some of the limitations of that? Then we talked about rural imprints in urban India, caste and kinship imprints. Then we talked about women and political participation, and finally on cultural lag. Right. So bunch of topics from both paper 1 as well as paper 2. In case you have any questions, we can take it up now. Yeah, so there is one question, name is not mentioned, Lenovo Tab M8. How come caste imprints in urban areas related to joint families? Right, so they're two different things, right? Caste imprints is separate, families is separate. We're not linking it with one another. The topic was, in urban areas, what are the rural imprints, right? Two kinds of rural imprints can be there. It can be rural kinship imprints, it can be rural caste imprints. So in urban areas, what kind of caste features you will find in urban areas, what kind of kinship features you find in urban areas. So that was the point. It is not that caste imprints and joint families are linked with one another. See, what can be the solution to improve situation of the Dalits in urban areas? One is saying, again, some of the things are already out there. You should have more representation. Just think about it, right? In urban areas, what is the problem? You don't have people who are from the Dalit community. They don't have access to different kinds of services. Or whenever there is any distribution of services, they don't have any enough representation. So again, what can be the solution to it? You should have enough representation in all these bodies. As a result of which you can change things. And by the way, the situation of the Dalits has changed drastically over a period of time. It's not that situation has not changed. The point here is now also segregation exists even after the change, right? So you are moving in the right direction. It's not that you're moving in the wrong direction, but the thing is, you should have greater access to some of these facilities, education facilities, position in administration, position in politics. That way, it will happen. So it's something which is a gradual process. It will happen over a period of time. Another thing, when it comes to caste-based violence and all these things, right? Again, if you have greater representation of members of the Dalit community, if you have greater participation of members of the community in active politics. I'm not saying that they should be just in parliament or in the cabinet, right? Active citizens, right? So that way also things can be possibly taken care of. Also, caste sensitization of administrative officials, caste sensitization of judicial officials. All these things can go a long way. Fatima says, not a question, but just a point to note that we still don't have a female CJ. The first will be just who will retire after 36 days. So many judicial activism starting from judiciary itself is representation. Yeah, I agree with you, Fatima. It's a good point that we do not have enough representation at the level of the judiciary as well, right? So it's a good point. And not just, I mean, just think about it, not just judiciary, right? Look at labor force, for example. We don't have enough women participation in the labor force. Hardly some 20% of the labor force will have women participation. And again, this implies that out of every 100 people, 20 are either looking for a job or they're working. They're not even working, right? It's not that 20 out of these 100 are working. 20 are either looking for a job or working. So women's participation in the labor force is minimal. If you look at the top positions of corporate hierarchy, there also will rarely find women leaders. And one or two women leaders will be there, and the media will basically glorify that. Will basically talk about them. But most of the cases will not have women leaders, right? So in administration, in politics, in different corporate positions, women's position is quite low. And that is also one of the reasons why India's rank in different indexes, right? Gender inequality index and all these things is very bad. There's high level of gender inequality. India's position is at par with some of these Middle East countries, Pakistan. In fact, in some of these countries, women's position is way better than India. Yeah, Nandini asked how joint family increases in urban areas instead of rural areas. That's what, right? We saw multiple reasons why joint families might be there in urban areas. One of the reasons can be many of these families are business families, right? So it might make sense for them to stay together. In some cases, might be the cost of living is too high, so instead of living separately, maybe stay together. In many cases, it might make sense to stay together because women's labor force participation rate is increasing. So you need some sort of maybe they're not able to afford a nanny service or something. Maybe they're taking the help of their grandparents. In some cases, the elderly generation, right? They need some form of support. They cannot stay separately, right? They cannot stay on their own. And in case of India, you don't have very good old age support structure, right? So in that case, the family is the one which provides the support. So as a result of which the family remains together. So all these factors are at play, which might be leading to a situation where you have more joint households. Jayan says, it is said, as it is said, moving of all people from villages will lead to degradation of cities. Resources like Delhi, Mumbai, what can be a better solution? No, it's not the case. See, then think about it like this. It's not one argument here is if people are moving to the cities, degradation of life will happen, right? If let's say the population of Delhi, Mumbai increases, degradation of life will happen. See, there are many cities world over where the density of population is even more than that, but they have a better standard of life. So it's not just a factor of population; it's also a factor of governance. How well governed you are. If you are better governed, then maybe there will not be degradation. So this is one argument. Second thing is, it is not just about people moving to the existing set of cities. You can have more cities as well, right? What's stopping India from having more cities? If you're having more cities, these cities will accommodate more people. In fact, if you look at census 2011 data and compare it with census 2001 data, you will find that there are more number of people in urban areas. But why has the number increased? Has it increased because people have migrated from rural areas to urban areas? No. What has happened is a lot of places which were previously classified as rural, now they're classified as urban because they develop different kinds of urban amenities. So it is not that only movement from rural to urban areas can happen. You can have more urban areas as well. There can be gradual development of urban areas. Let's say you're setting up an industry somewhere, right? Now, if an industry is set up around that, a city will develop. Right? It will become an urban area over a period of time. Let's say there is a university which is set up in some far area which is away from a main city. If you're setting up a university over there, what will happen? Maybe they will have like 4,000 students or more than that. And over a period of time, you will have urban amenities over there. It will become an urban area. It will become a township. It will become a city eventually, maybe. So it's not just movement of people from rural to urban areas. It can be creation of new urban areas. And also movement of people from rural to urban areas did not necessarily make things worse. If governance is better, it can be accommodated. And keep in mind, in case of India, urbanization is not mostly because of movement of people from rural to urban areas. Urbanization in India is mostly because of natural growth of population in urban areas. Right? Again, that's what data points out. If you look at migration data, maximum amount of migration happens from rural to rural areas in India. More than 50% of the migration in India is rural to rural areas. It is not from rural to urban areas. Shayad asks a very interesting question. In local government, women name is used for contesting election. So how will it change? What steps have to be taken? Now, so Shayad, any kind of problem that you have, right? You can basically divide into two parts, right? One is the quantity issue. Second is the quality issue. Any problem, right? Think of it, divide into two parts. So in case of India, women were not there in politics. Right, so you did not have enough women in politics. So this is one of the quantity issue. You did not have enough women. Number of women in politics was not less. Of course, women were not there in politics, so again, it is a quality problem in the sense that you do not have women's participation, women's voice in politics. So through reservation, what you have done is you have addressed the quantity problem now. Now you have more women in politics, right? But you have not been able to address the quality problem. That means the quality of participation is not good because they are basically representing the interest of someone else. They are not using their own, they're not using their own volition over there, right? They're not using their own agency. Someone else is dictating on their behalf. So quantity problem has been solved, quality is remaining. But keep in mind, first, you always address the quantity problem. You can't directly go and address the quality problem. From quantity to quality, it is a gradual thing. At present, maybe there are some women leaders, maybe half of the women leaders are there. In fact, it's not half, it will be less than that, who are proxy candidates. But over a period of time, this will also be addressed. There's something which is gradual. Over a period of time, they will also start exercising their agency. So it's not, I mean, you have to always compare it with the previous case where you did not even have any representation. Now you have representation. And it's not that all candidates are just going into the lines of their fathers or fathers or husbands. And over the next generation, things will even be better, right? You'll have more women who are actually championing for the cause of women rather than going into someone's line. So this is something which is always the case. Quantity, then quality. I'll use some more examples as well. When it comes to education, same problem. We did not have a lot of people enrolling in education, right? And obviously the quality of education will also not be good. The learning outcomes will not be good. What we have done now, we're ensuring that most of the kids are now enrolled in education. 99.2% of the kids are getting enrolled in primary education. We have resolved the quantity issue. Now our focus will be quality. How do you ensure that learning outcomes improve? And that's what we're doing with the national education policy. So all these things are gradual process and it will take time. It will not happen overnight. Yeah, I can't see any more question. Yeah. So there are some questions about PRS. PRS is basically one of those organizations which researches on behalf of Parliament, or not on behalf of Parliament, but basically researches things that Parliament takes up, right? Different kinds of bills, acts. They are the ones who do a detailed analysis of that, right? So all the different rules, regulations, laws which are from the Parliament will be analyzed over there. So just search for PRS website, you'll get it. Parliamentary Research Service. I mean, you can say that, but they don't call it like that. So now they call themselves as PRS. So you can refer to the website. It is one of those most important source when it comes to different kind of laws, policies, etc. Anshul asked, where can I read about the previous one? It will be there in the portal, right? So the last session that we had, it is there in the portal. If you need any help, you can just ask your mentors. They will guide you. They will give you the link. Vani asked, what is the cognitive component of culture? So see, certain kind of things are culturally shared, right? Now, for example, the color red is, for example, right? In a particular culture, red might signify something, right? Maybe red signifies that it is danger. So in that culture, among that community, it is shared, that meaning is shared. So people over there in that community, they have similar understanding of the color red. In some other community, red might mean something else. Maybe in some case, red might imply fertility. In some case, red might mean something else. So how you know about it? How do you understand that? How do you understand that meaning of that? It is culturally shared. So that is the cognitive component of culture, right? How you understand the same thing, or how you have the same understanding of one particular symbol. Right? If I'm making some form of a gesture, let's say I'm making this gesture. Now, maybe in a community this implies, oh, nice, right? So the cognitive component of the culture has basically helped you understand that this means nice. In some other culture, this might mean 0. In some other culture, it might mean 3, right? Depends. But in any community, how do you make meanings? How do you have the same understanding? That is what is called cognitive component of culture. Okay, so yeah, we don't have any more questions. So we can and it's already 11, so we can call it a day, and we'll meet again in one more session of sociology issues. So yeah, I hope you keep on answering the questions and sending it to us. That is the best way you can have your preparation. So we'll meet again. Thank you.